Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We're going through the Fountainhead. We are on part 4. I think we're going through 6 through 10 today. But before that, I had this diagram that I have used to summarize the characters in Fountainhead and all the issues in Fountainhead. So I have a new version of that I want to share with everybody. And let me just go ahead and make sure everybody is muted here. Okay, all right. So let me get started. So I think there are 3 things that are out there that you need to focus on. One is I, who are you? Second is the world, which I'm calling C for now. I will explain later on. What is the world? And third is truth, in terms of the universal principles that are behind the world and behind who you are. So there is the I, there is the world, and there is the truth. So that is this side. All right. So here, what you do is that you seek the truth, you build the world, and here you can say love or will. So you start with I will or I love, and then you proceed to seek the truth of what things are, and then you build the world accordingly. So there is this circle, if I can make it a circle, like this. So you go up from your I, up like this. So this is a circle. Then you seek the truth, having figured out what the world is like. You build the world, and that supports you, and the loop goes on. Now, unfortunately, there is a loop that is possible exactly opposite to that, where you have an I, inverted I, what Louis Sullivan calls the inverted self. And then it goes to the inversion of the world, and it goes to the inversion of truth. So you can call this here dominated by fear, or you're drifting. Instead of saying I will and engage your mind fully in trying to understand, you're drifting. And here, instead of building, I'm going to call it exploiting. You're starting with whatever is already there, and you're simply exploiting it. And here, you're using ideas to actually delude. Instead of trying to seek the truth, you're trying to delude yourself and others. And the direction is this way, exactly opposite. So, and this one right here, I want to put one more line here, like this. So this is really your choice. This side is what these are first-handers. And these are second-handers. Okay. If I want to put the slogans for each of them, this one, the slogan really starts with I will. And if I had to come up with a slogan for the second-handers, this is a borrowed slogan. It is good Sahir. So what Rand is talking about, let me do one thing. Let me go ahead and this is all. Is there anything else I have to say on this? Not really. So let me go ahead and copy this over so I can mark it up to make a few points. Okay. All right. So what I want to say here is now I want to put it in terms of the characters. So what I was saying, this is connecting to a presentation that I did on Fountainhead. I think this is a simpler way of looking at it. The crucial thing here is that the bad guys really start with good Sahir. So they are focused on this. So instead, so you're actually here. You have a choice of either becoming this, where you start loving the world and say, I will seek the truth and I will build the world, and the building of the world will support, make it a better place for me, creating this positive, virtuous loop. Or you can say, I am full of fear about myself. Goods are already here. Let me exploit the goods that are there. Let me rationalize and create all kinds of false ideas. Most philosophies are these, in order to delude myself and others, so I remain there. Now, these are kind of fractals. So you can imagine that actually there is a loop right here. So which is really consuming, starts, somebody else is building something and there are people here trying to do this. So it's a fractal kind of a system, within an individual, you can have these loops. So in putting in terms of characters, it said that this is Keating, full of fear, trying to follow whatever it is that people are doing. This is Winan, who is exploiting all the system that is there, trying to get power over people as they are. And this is Tuhi, trying to create ideas to delude other people. There is a loop that goes between them. I'd given a small example within the Stoddard Temple of this being largely Dominique, and realize that all of them, like for example, all of them have the other aspects. So the Dominique is loving, she's also seeking, she's also building, but it's her love which is the most prominent thing. What Mallory is doing is that he is actually creating, saying, what is it? And trying to capture the truth in his art. And Mike here is focused on building. So they are kind of different ways of focusing on the world, and they build on one another, but they are all working together. And there is a camaraderie between them. These are the first-handers, and these are the second-handers. And so this is my summary of everything I know about the Fountainhead. So I'm going to stop here. That's it. That wasn't that long. All right. So next up is going to be Rob. Rob, go ahead.
Okay. So I got a couple things to cover today. Sherri mentioned that she found this particular section kind of unpleasant to read. And I think that the reason for that is that what's happening here is that we're wrapping up the characterization of a lot of the bad guys. There's a lot of wrapping up that happens here with Peter Keating. Not much happens with Peter Keating in terms of characterization after this. His character arc is sort of coming crashing into its conclusion in this section. And Katie Halsey gets wrapped up rather definitively. I'll talk about that in a second. And Tui is sort of reaching the height or the culmination of his career with this. So that's sort of, I think, why it's maybe not as much fun of a chapter to read. So the interesting thing we hear with Tui is we see him with a different group of people than before. So we've seen him as the sort of the manipulator, the puppet master behind all the different intellectuals. And now we see him going into a different realm, which is basically the progressive or pragmatic businessman. So this is Mitch Layton and Homer Slaughter and that type. Mitch Layton is the progressive businessman, sort of sort of caricature or satire on what we used to call the limousine liberal, right? So the guy who inherits $250 million and then goes around likes to go around talking about how progressive he is. I see him actually in a lot of the characterization. What struck me this time is how much he's an early preview of Jim Taggart, who's going to become a much more central character in Atlas Shrugged. So in Atlas Shrugged, you have Mitch Layton and Ellsworth Toohey. You have different versions of it. Mitch Layton becomes Jim Taggart. Ellsworth Toohey becomes, who's the guy? Somebody shout it out.
Floyd Ferris.
Floyd Ferris, that's right. They drew a blank on the name. He becomes Floyd Ferris. So in Atlas Shrugged, though, the emphasis is much more on Jim Taggart and much less on Floyd Ferris. So it's sort of like you took this Mitch Layton character and made him a central character of the story, and took Ellsworth Toohey and made him a side character. That's the difference there. But you see that it's Toohey reaching out, and you're seeing his influence, his influence, and his ability to manipulate things sort of spreading out to another group. And that's how we're getting sort of the full culmination of Toohey's efforts. He goes from being a guy who influences college students who go on later and to become dependent on him, to a guy who writes a book and becomes famous, to a guy who's then behind a whole bunch of intellectuals going out in the culture. And now he's going up to the idea of, now he's got so a bunch of wealthy people and pragmatist businessmen who are hopping on the bandwagon, who he then uses to support everything else that he's doing. So you're getting a sense of this, he's reached this sort of culmination of his full manipulative range. And he gives us a couple, Toohey himself, of course, the most, in some ways, up to a certain limit, the most observant person about Ellsworth Toohey is Ellsworth Toohey. So he has a great description here. When he's watching all this discussion going on at this party with Mitch Layton, and he says, Ellsworth Toohey said nothing. He stood smiling at the vision of a huge typewriter. Each famous name he heard was a key in its keyboard, and each controlling a special field, each hitting, leaving its mark, and the whole making connected sentences on a vast blank sheet. A typewriter, he thought, presupposes the hand that punches its keys. So that's Toohey's view of himself. He is the guy pushing the typewriter. Each typewriter is an intellectual in a certain field, and they're all putting things together that add up to a consistent, integrated worldview that basically makes everyone, brings everyone under his power. Though he gives a somewhat more interesting, a somewhat slightly different metaphor elsewhere. Let me see where I got this here. Typewriter fertilizer. Oh, see, Sherri writes down where the pages of things are, and this is tremendously helpful to me.
You're welcome.
So I go and say, where's that scene where, and she goes for notes and tells me, oh, that's 567. All right, so the fertilizer is this other analogy. And here's where he's just a couple scenes later talking to Peter Keating, and Peter Keating says, how is it? He says, remember just a few years ago, Lois Cook and Gordon Prescott and Ike and Lance. Did we ever find out what Ike's last name is? I think it's conspicuous. You never find out what Ike's last name is. Lois Cook and Gordon Prescott and Ike and Lance. They were nobody at all. And now, why Ellsworth, they're on top and they're all yours. Anywhere I look, any big name I hear, it's one of your boys. You're amazing, Ellsworth. How anybody could do that in just a few years? And Toohey responds, it's much simpler than it appears to you, Peter. That's because you think in terms of personalities. You think it's done piecemeal. But dear me, the lifetimes of 100 press agents wouldn't be enough. It can be done much faster. This is the age of time-saving devices. If you want something to grow, you don't nurture each seed separately. You just spread a certain fertilizer. Nature will do the rest. I believe you think I'm the only one responsible, but I'm not. Goodness, no. I'm just one figure out of many, one lever in a very vast movement. very vast and very ancient. It just so happens that I chose the field that interests you, the field of art, because I thought it focused the decisive factors in the task we had to accomplish. There's a whole lot going on in that little section there, but the idea of spreading a certain fertilizer and the seeds will grow. And of course, he's spreading the intellectual atmosphere, the intellectual environment. And it's partly he's doing that with ideas, but I find it interesting that she says his field is art. And he chose art because, what's the phrase here? Because I thought it focused the decisive factors. Mm-hmm. So he's sort of presenting, he's spreading a sense of life, a certain implicit view of the world by way of influence on art, spreading it out into the world. And that's the fertilizer that then causes certain things to grow and keeps other things from growing. Mm-hmm. Now, he doesn't make that analogy here, but it's a fertilizer and it's also an herbicide in a way that it prevents certain,
it's pre-emergent.
Yes, it's a pre-emergent herbicide that's supposed to prevent a Howard Rourke from growing up. All right, so that's, and this whole party that he's at the beginning with Mitch Layton, and I particularly liked Eve Layton, that description of her as being Venus de Milo emerging from a submarine hatch. You know, this classical beauty, but with this modern touch to it. And it captures a lot of what she's trying to capture here is the whole atmosphere, the whole environment of the Red Decade in the 1930s, when there was this sort of fashion for communism and fascism. Well, communism and fascism both had a certain vogue. And there was this sense, oh, planned economy, centrally planned, that's the wave of the future. It's self-evident, as Eve Layton would say. And you know, a couple decades later, Tom Wolfe would describe this as radical chic, where you had these people in these giant penthouse apartments in New York City, inviting in this case it was a party by these leading intellectuals. I think it may have been Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein, and this giant penthouse apartment in New York City, inviting the Black Panthers to show up to this party to mix and mingle with the elites. And this weird sort of thing that these sort of far crazy, wild-eyed socialist radicals, or I don't even know what you'd call the Black Panthers, would be mixing with the wealthy patrons of the arts and that type. So she's trying to capture what the version of that was happening in the 1930s with this sort of fashion for socialist ideas. But I think the main thing going on intellectually in this section that we're talking about today is that she's cashing in on a lot of what she's set up with this issue going all the way back to the beginning, this issue of the self and self-interest. And she's starting to make it more explicit. Now, Ayn Rand's very famous for having these speeches these philosophical speeches in her novels. She doesn't really get to that yet. I think the first one that you could call something like that is it's in the next section we're about to talk, where he talks to Gail Wynand about the nature of a second-hander. That's the first actual honest to goodness speech you get there. But one thing she's famous for having these big speeches in her novels, but one thing that people sort of don't realize is she often has a lot of novel before you get to the speech. So I looked at Atlas Shrugged, which is more famous for its speeches. It has more of them. But the first speech there shows up about 400 pages in, after you've had about 400 pages of action to set you up for it. And here what's happening in this section is you've had about 500 pages of action to where we've brought up some of these issues. They've sort of been dealt with piecemeal. And now they're starting to, she doesn't have a speech yet, but in the conversations and in the scenes here, the issue of the self and what is the meaning of selfishness or self-interest is coming out much more explicitly. And a lot of stuff goes on in this section regarding to that. I think the most interesting and in a way, most chilling one is with Peter Keening and his mom. Let's see. And she goes, his mom comes back to live with him. He says, Mrs. Keating offered no suggestions, no reproaches. There was instead a new panic-shaped tenderness in her manner toward her son. She would cook his breakfast, even though they had a maid. She would prepare his favorite dish, French pancakes, the kind he had liked so much when he was 9 years old and sick with the measles. If he noticed her efforts and made some comment of pleasure, she nodded, blinking, turning away, asking herself why it should make her so happy, and if it did, why should her eyes fill with tears? She would ask suddenly after a silence, "It will be all right, Petey, won't it?" Once she asked him, "You're happy, Peter, aren't you?" He looked at her and saw that she was not laughing at him. Her eyes were wide and frightened. And as he could not answer, she cried, "But you've got to be happy, Petey, you've got to. Else what have I lived for?" He wanted to get up, gather her in his arms, and tell her that it was all right. And then he remembered Guy Franken saying to him on his wedding day, "I want you to feel proud of me, Peter. I want to feel that it had some meaning." Then he could not move. He felt himself in the presence of something he must not grasp, must never allow into his mind. He turned away from his mother. Now, that's a really profound thing. She says, you have to be, which says, are you happy? You have to be happy, or else what have I lived for? So in the speech, one of the speeches we're going to get coming up, Ellsworth Toohey makes this fully explicit, what he's describing, but she's preparing the ground for it here with this interaction with Peter and his mom, where the idea is that she's spent her whole life sacrificing for him to make him happy, while always, browbeating and doing that passive aggressive mother thing, where she then gets him to sacrifice in order to do the things that she wants in order to make her happy. So he's sacrificing to make her happy, and she's sacrificing to make him happy. And it's this endless loop of everybody sacrificing for somebody else and nobody actually being happy. And in a later speech, Ellsworth Toohey will spell that out. He'll say, everyone doing nothing but sacrificing for the good of the person next to him, who's doing nothing but sacrificing for the good of the person next to him, and so on around the world, and all will suffer and none enjoy. And that's the system. That's her view of what the altruist system is. The idea is, if you're living for the sake of others, it's this endless loop, like Keating and his mom have, where she's sacrificing for him and he's sacrificing for her, and they both end up not knowing what it's about. And I noticed that Franken is also brought in there as an example, where he also was. Now Franken's an interesting example because he's not so much the I will sacrifice for you and then make you guilty so you sacrifice for me kind of thing. But Franklin was always focused on other people. He's focused on what you could get from on the prestige and the his legacy was the prestige and the fame and the adulation he could get from other people. So he put the goal of his life out there in the world and other people, and then ends up asking it's got to mean something. There has to be some meaning to it. And then Peter Keating is his meaning, because he's also going to go out and be famous and get prestige from other people. But it's all, that's why this reminds that Keating thinks of that in this moment, is it's the same emptiness of he's pursuing prestige so he can then pass it on to Peter, who can then pursue prestige, and there's no there is ever there. Then the really chilling scene, because there's a whole bunch of variations on this little theme here. The really chilling scene is his scene where this is the very end of this section that we're going over, where Peter Keating meets Katie, after jilting her at the altar and meeting her years later. And the most horrifying thing about it is that, you see the effect that living with Ellsworth Toohey has on her, because she talks about how upset she was when he jilted her and basically left her at the altar to go marry Dominique. Says, but I suppose that's normal. It's something everybody has to go through, like the measles, or so Uncle Ellsworth says. So you can see Ellsworth Toohey went to work on her and basically convinced her that her love for Peter Keating was trivial and useless and meaningless, and
no great consequence.
And I think the phrase is of no great consequence. And as he's leaving, towards the end of the conversation, he says, this is Keating's inner thoughts. He thought that he had believed it was a simple sequence, the past and the present. And if there was a loss in the past, one was compensated by pain in the present. And pain gave it a form of immortality. But he had not known that one could destroy like this, kill retroactively, so that to her it had never existed. So there's Peter Keating's work. Like I said, we're wrapping up a lot of the minor characters. So we see the final result of Peter Keating's, Ellsworth Toohey's work on Katie Halsey, which is he doesn't just kill her spirit, he kills it retroactively. He makes it as if what was in her spirit had never existed at all. but that's also the thing of, again, the self and the things that you value for yourself being that this altruist mentality of being focused entirely on others means that you end up killing whatever it is in yourself, and killing it retroactively in this case.
Are you talking about the inexhaustible?
Sherri wants me to mention the inexhaustible cracker. I love
have
that
to
part of
read-
the scene where he says, this is just literary
just
thing that I think is nice.
589.
589.
Yeah. It's listed on the side.
Inexhaustible cracker.
Oh, yeah, right.
No. It's just gotta be here. Oh, here it is.
This is one of. This is why you mentioned from the beginning that
Because as he's realizing what's going on with Katie here, he has this great thing.
yeah, this
Then he discovered how strange it was when one lost the knack of eating automatically and had to do it by full conscious effort. The cracker seemed inexhaustible. He could not finish the process of chewing. He moved his jaws without reducing the amount of gritty pulp in his mouth. It just really gives you this sort of out-of-body experience he's having as he sees realize that everything that Katie has been killed retroactively. All right, so the theme of a lot of these characters, with Katie, with Franken, with Keating and his mom, and this sort of loop, this doom loop that they're in, is they're all looking for validation outside the self. Now we get a contrast to that with Gail Winan. Now this is actually from last week's section, but I didn't get to this, but it connects to this. And that is Winan is thinking back. He's having this moment of introspection while he's driving out to the site for the house. This is right before that thing where Rourke talks about what the meaning of life is. And this is Winan's thoughts in his head. If it were true, that old legend about appearing before a supreme judge and naming one's record, I would offer with all my pride, not any act I committed, but one thing I have never done on this earth, that I never sought an outside sanction. I would stand and say, I am Gail Winan, the man who has committed every crime except the foremost one, that of ascribing futility to the wonderful act of existence and seeking justification beyond myself. This is my pride, that now, thinking of the end, I do not cry like all the men of my age. But what was the use and the meaning? I was the use and the meaning. I, Gail Winan, that I lived and that I acted. So that's, this is the Ayn Rand religion, as Joia put it. This is her answer to all these people saying, what does it mean? So about 50 pages, 30 or 40 pages later, Louisa Keating will ask, what have I lived for if you're not happy, to Peter Keating? And he will think of Guy Franken saying, there has to be some meaning to it all. And these are all people seeking an outside sanction, seeking meaning outside of themselves, instead of themselves being the meaning that they lived and that they acted. All right. But you'll notice that for Winan, this has a curious effect, though, because we have this whole section where he talks about how he's more eager to go to work than he wakes up in the morning, more eager to go to work than ever. And then when he gets to the banner and he actually has to start working, he hates it more than he ever did. And that's so the thing that, he's saying, the idea that he gives his own, he never sought an outside sanction. I was the use and the meaning. So he's got that first-handed element, but he's starting to notice even more than before the conflict between that, the contradiction between that and what the banner is, and the way that the banner is, the way it's written, and the awful bromides that have to go into it, and the photo ops with Lancelot Clokey, and all the sort of trash that he has to do to pander to the mob. It's heightened the contradiction for him, and he starts experiencing that contradiction where he himself, having grasped this about himself, he is more eager to do his work than ever. But when he gets to the actual concretes of what he is actually doing in his work, and negotiating contracts for Jell-O advertisements, and all this sort of stuff, the more disgusted he is with it. So you can see that we're sort of heightening the contradictions that will have to come to a head in Winan at some point. So we get actually a much more consistent answer to this question about what is the self and what is self-interest from Howard Rourke, of course. And that's his section with Keating, where he's talking with Keating about this idea of designing Cortlandt homes. And Keating says, oh, here, let me go a little earlier. Keating sat looking at him for a moment, then said slowly, as if trying to distinguish the dim form of some thought of his own. Everybody would say you're a fool. Everybody would say I'm getting everything. You'll get everything society can give a man. You'll keep all the money. You'll take any fame or honor anyone might want to grant. You'll accept such gratitude as the tenants might feel. And I'll take what nobody can give a man except himself. I will have built Cortlandt. You're getting more than I am, Howard. Peter, the voice was triumphant. You understand that. So this is Howard Rourke finally, getting through to Peter, at least for a little while on this. But this is Howard Rourke getting his message that Winant had said that I existed and that I acted is the meaning of my life. And that's what Rourke is saying in a more consistent form, that he'll get what nobody can give a man except himself. I will have built Cortlandt. So he will get that he existed and that he acted. And that is what gives meaning and purpose to his life. And that's what the real self-interest is, because it's where the real self is. Now, but you see that, what she's also doing, in addition to wrapping up especially a lot of the sort of minor characters and a lot of the villains, wrapping up their character arcs and their characterization here in this section, she's also setting you up with these two big contradictions going in there. So Rourke is the one contradiction is Rourke, the guy who lives for his own work, is now once again having this partnership with Keating, where Keating goes and then takes that and launders it out into the world. And we know we just know this is a bad idea. We know that something's got to give on this. And then we also have Gail Winant starting to face up to the contradictions in his life, that he's pandering to the mob, but while at the same time saying that he is the purpose and meaning of his life. So we know that something's got to give on both of those things. And those contradictions are really getting sort of heightened and brought to a breaking point. And then we know that at the next section, something big has to happen in the plot to resolve those.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Next up is Maritza.
So these 5 chapters, I like the way Rob put it, that Ayn Rand is tying up some ends and setting up some dichotomies. What struck me the strongest of these chapters is that we get a really in-depth view of Ayn Rand's concept of evil as she perceives it. And we're giving a different look into what would be Tui's philosophy, as it were. Because we've been seeing all his machinations, as it were, and his puppeteering, but here we start to be shown the fruits of that. And what I believe we're really being given is a microscopic view into what Ayn Rand would define as evil in a society. Couple in the first chapter we go through here, chapter 6, there are a couple lines. There's this group of Tui's mediocre people, right? Because Tui's ultimate goal, and we'll see this there, his speech, couple chapters further down that we'll get to soon, are something that he tells us is that, the best way, and he said this in an earlier chapter, but he states it more, that the best way for him to get control of folks is, you don't tell someone not to go see a good play. What you do is you teach them to view a bad play in the same light. So Tui is trying to make mediocrity indistinguishable from the brilliant or excellent, because he wants an even playing field. And so his merry band of mediocre individuals, or maybe not individuals, that might be a wrong word to use here. Maybe we'll say individual personalities, which, well, I'm still saying it wrong, because if I'm trying to use Tui's language, he would not like me to use either individual or personality because they're not, in his mind, he wants to erase those words from society. But these characters that are speaking when we first start the chapter, they give us such a precise view into what I'm deeming Tui's philosophy. So maybe this might be the religion of Tui, right? And also, one step higher, I believe these are the answer that Ayn Rand gives us when asking, what is true evil in a society? Because we have these like statements and they're said with such conviction. These are topics that, even having read on several different philosophers, I don't know that I would be able to say them with such certainty that I'm perceiving these characters to be saying them. And it's things like they say, whenever a new compulsion is I can't read my own handwriting, sorry, is imposed upon us, we automatically gain a new freedom. Only by accepting total compulsion can we achieve total freedom. Pollination of the, so what I'm seeing here is there's a whole bunch of other words, right? And it says, unselfishness is the only moral principle. Everybody who refused to be unselfish should be shot. Compulsion is the law of nature. There's no such thing as a person. There's only the collective entity. Words must be freed from the oppression of reason. And these are all statements said by different people in that first chapter as they're all sitting together, interacting with each other. And what I wrote here as a note was that, to me, I view all of these as a pollution of the concepts of patterns, of rhythm, of beauty, which are things that we use in our day-to-day to help us solidify our own concepts of individuality, or as people or personalities, as it were. So this pollution of the concepts of, rhythm, of beauty, actually what it's doing is it's setting up an intolerance for any kind of expression of the self. And again, what we're seeing is a response to Ayn Rand's philosophy. If she took on a very, very difficult task. She decided to redefine a word that has severe negative connotations in our society. Whenever you say to somebody that selfishness is good, they are looking at you like they're about to throttle you. Ask me how I know. But the thing here is that when you view it from the specific definition that she reminds us is, now I'm a big fan of her essays on the virtue of selfishness. And she reminds us that, so she challenges, what she's doing ultimately, she's challenging the assumptions that the only way forward in a society is through altruism. She really believes, and this is something you guys have heard from me as well, is that it has to start with the I. And in Shrikant's diagrams, he has one of those points is the I, right? You couldn't have that diagram without the I. And basically she's saying you cannot have a society, a culture without this I. You can't even have a self without the I. And so what we're seeing in these chapters is, and again, I think the writing is brilliant because this is a fiction novel. And she manages to put words into the mouths of her characters that so clearly define for us her philosophy that it's incredible. So what we're seeing here is she's answering the question, what does evil look like in a society? What sounds the death knell of a culture? She's providing those answers here. If you're believing that accepting total compulsion is how you can achieve total freedom, if you're believing that the only moral principle is unselfishness, so total disregard for yourself, and if you believe that words must be freed from the oppression of reason, then you are someone who is embracing a lack of self. And that's, we see in Peter Keating. Peter Keating is gaining weight. He's super unhappy, but he's got all these accolades, all the accolades that society can give in the architectural realm. He has achieved before the age of 40. And even in our modern society, that's quite the feat. And yet we see a miserable, lost man. And the most heartbreaking, so there are several different conversations. So we see the interaction with Tui and Keating after we get through hearing these, like, you know, the answer to what is evil, right? Amongst all these, Tui's little merry band of mediocreness, we see Keating and Tui, and then we see Keating and Rourke's interactions. In all of them, it's just heartbreaking to see what's become of Peter. Peter is, to me, it's like the person who robbed the bank, accidentally killed the guard, and now is like, what have I done? Oh gosh, I didn't mean to do this. How did I get here? How can I pull the ripcord? The problem is, though, is that now you're a murderer. So there's no going back. There's no way you can take this back and say, oops, I'm sorry. If you had merely robbed the bank, you might have been able to go to jail and you could have followed the society's rules for rehabilitation and go back into society. You would never be the same, but you would have a path forward. But once you've murdered someone in that situation, your path forward is altered so drastically that life as you know it can never be the same. You will never be able to go back. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Peter murdered himself along the way. He did it to himself. So we see Katie herself was murdered by Tui. But Peter was a puppet in Tui's puppeteering as well. But we saw along the way all the various points where Peter had the opportunity to turn left and he turned right. And he did so willingly because, as we saw, he didn't want to make a decision. Several times, remember when he sat on his bed and couldn't sleep and he wanted it to be the next day already, when he had to make the decision whether he would marry Katie or not and postpone it like his mother wanted him to? He wanted it to be the next day so that the decision would have been taken away from him. That was Keating's entire path in this book. And now we see him standing there and he doesn't know how to get out of it. And the saddest thing is when he shows his paintings to Rourke, and Rourke tells him, it's too late, Peter. And this is all an answer to that question. What does evil look like? And this is Ayn Rand's answer to us, as I perceive it to be. You know, it's one of those things where it seems so subtle, but it all is centered around the self. And it's that idea that with no self, we are lost. You know, it's how do people face intractable conflicts of interest? And here you're seeing how it shapes differently for each of us. And Tui views himself as winning. He's kind of like the cat that caught the canary right now. He's so pleased with himself. And you see that his personality, we see more, little bit ugliness. He feels he's so successfully tied the strings of his puppeteering that he no longer requires the same facade he gave you before. And we're going to see this in Keating further down. So we're not quite done yet with the destruction of Peter, because in the speech, and you know, Rob was talking about speeches, and I find a very, very powerful speech is the one that Tui presents to Keating a couple chapters in the future here. And it's this culmination, this idea that, so if we keep making these choices or failing to make choices, we'll find ourselves without a self. And it's not any less ugly, whether you're looking at Peter or you're looking at Katie. I mean, and I'm jumping around here, but in the interaction with Keating and Katie, what struck me most was the description of her lips. He finds her to be so much the same, except for her lips. He said they got smaller and meaner, and they just looked like lips that were used to giving orders, and not big orders and not important orders, but small little mean ones. And you could see it in the curtness with which she addressed the server. And that reminded me, in a strange way, it reminded me of the pain that doesn't go all the way down. Because this is the flip side of it. She had a pain that went down to a point, but she, instead of dealing with it and acknowledging it in any way, she managed to find, and I have zero doubts that she did this herself. And I'm convinced that this was the machinations of Tui, but she just erased it, like erased something. You know, when I was younger, I said to somebody once, and I think it's the meanest thing I've ever said to anyone. And in general, I don't try to be mean, but I said to someone, I don't want to hate you. I want to nothing you. And when I said it back then, what I was invoking an image was Katie. This interaction with Peter and Katie is what I was invoking. The idea that, you know, my disdain for this person was such that I felt, so to me, hate is another strong emotion. And I didn't want to devote any energy to this person. But I was making the conscious decision. And in actuality, it's near impossible to actually nothing anyone, right? But I did say to them that I wanted to nothing them. This was years ago. And Katie came to mind for me because she decided, or she managed, or she didn't have a strong enough self, that what happened to her is that she nothinged everyone. Just everyone is nothing. There's no, there's no emotion there. She's a robot almost. Imagine a society where we had that, if it was a whole society full of Katies. If you go back, somebody who says there's no such thing as a person, there's only the collective entity, that's a Katie. That's somebody who can nothing everyone. That's a terrifying world to live in. How can we consider morality? I mean, how can you have moral or immoral if there's nothing? You just can't get there. If the I is missing, everything else will crumble. And that's what Tui is counting on. This is where we get the religion of Tui. He wants everyone to embrace mediocrity, to embrace that ability to nothing everyone, because that allows the vacuum of a self where he can rule, because in that emptiness, he's going to put his puppet strings. And that's what we're seeing here. And he's very successfully done this already with several people. So when you go and you look at the conversation between Tui and Keating, you get more of this religion of Tui. You get, and Rob spoke about it, this idea of the seed, if you want something to grow, you don't nurture each seed separately. You just spread a certain fertilizer and nature will do the rest. And the interesting thing there is that what came to mind for me is that I bet you he's probably talking about like some toxic fertilizer that's not good for eating. But even more interestingly, in that conversation, he talks about two concepts. He says, people are so enamored by speaking of divide and conquer. I would postulate to you that we should talk about unite and rule. And it's funny because looking at unite and rule outside the concept of Tui, it sounds like a very grandiose idea, right? Concept. But when you consider the manner in which he is presenting it to us, it gives one chills. Because he doesn't want to divide and conquer, because he wants to get all the souls collected together and rule them all. Doesn't that take us back to that movie that I didn't watch? I think something like that. I don't even, there's a phrase, I don't remember the catchphrase in the movie, sorry. But it's that idea that he just wants to collect it all. So unite and rule can be this beautiful, glorious thing if what we're uniting is a group of individuals strong enough to rule together. But if what you unite is a whole bunch of people who don't understand that they should have a self, you end up with, the March of the Centuries, which we saw there. They got all these, famous known architects who got together, and they had a lot of fun being together, but they failed to come up with a good product as the end result because none of them invoked their own individual selves into the spirit of the project. And, I have often said that the best way to build a strong community, a strong group, is to first ensure that the I is firmly planted and strengthened, and then move forward. Because when you have I believe that a sick society can only be improved by improving the individuals. And what we're seeing here is Ayn Rand presenting to us the flip side. What happens when we're attempting to build a community, a society, with a group that is willingly without a self? And not only do they not feel the need to identify with their inner core, with their I, they are willingly throwing it to the side and telling others that if they fail to do so, then there's something wrong with them. They're the worst of the worst. In fact, they even say they should be shot. The Langton, she's described as this beautiful person. How can you be beautiful and say such ugly things like everyone who refuses to be unselfish should be shot? But that's what we're seeing here. And I do, from a literature perspective, I enjoy the imagery of this beautiful person saying such horrible, ugly, philosophical things. It's more impactful to me, as it were. Now, when Rourke and Howard meet, I was given pause by the way he starts the conversation. He says, "Howard, I'm a parasite. I have been all my life." And if any of you were hanging out with me on Thursday, you would understand why that's especially interesting, because we just went through, we're looking through, the concept of evolution's impact on the self. And we were talking about parasites in evolution and in our culture. So that was fascinating to me. I was like, I'll show you Exhibit A. But it's heartbreaking because looking in the mirror, Peter Keating somehow understands that he threw his self away and that this is a lifelong thing. It's not like a one point in time that he can fix. So it's just heartbroken that he can see that and he's saying that. But this also shows his growth. Now, we will not see Peter Keating turn a corner in this book, but I would like to think we're left with the hope that maybe he does a little bit in the future, at the end, when the book is gone and done, because of this statement. Because he can say to Howard, I'm a parasite. I have been all my life. It makes me think of those people who go to, AA and they say, hello, I'm an alcoholic. I think that's like first step. And because he's saying, I am, what is he doing? He somehow found some little tiny ash of his eye, and he's trying to, grasp at it. And we don't know if there's enough there that can be salvaged. But I would like to think that anyone who can look at themselves and say, I have thrown myself away, there's hope. And maybe I'm ever the optimist, right? But that's my thinking. And when Peter, so that's why it's also really sad to hear Rourke say to him, it's too late, Peter. but it might be too late for his artistic talent, and hopefully not too late for him to find some type of self. He's also horrified by Katie. And so Ayn Rand is presenting to us that there's no more hope for Katie, but there might be for Peter, because Katie is happily without a self. She not only has she killed it, she found those ashes and blew them to the winds, and she's going forth telling everyone if they don't do so, there's something wrong with them. Again, the religion of Tui. But Keating is not. So I find that to be a really interesting, small little point here, is that there may be hope for Keating, which is something, again, from Ayn Rand's philosophy, is that, you know, in order to say I love you, first one must be able to say the I. And what we're seeing here is the potentiality, is that even if you're so lost that you've thrown away your I, you might somehow be able to pick it up. Unfortunately, it starts by looking and saying, I threw it away. And that's what I see there. Now, one other thing I wanted to look into here with this set of chapters was Gail Winan. Gail Winan he's a second-hander, as we see from Shrikant's graph, but his approach to things is so jarring when we see it compared to Howard Roark's, because at the very core, we see so many similarities, but Gail's is a very, really, I had the thought here that perhaps we're being presented with Ayn Rand's view of how most people view selfishness. Because in Tui's merry band of mediocre folks, they point to Gail often as, look at pure selfishness, right? And then when we see Gail Winan, the way he's treating things, like, you know, the house that's a prison for Dominique, a beautiful cage, the gilded cage. He wants to, you know, when he sees that work is tired. Oh, no, wait. When he sees that work is tired, he wants to lock him away and force him to sleep. Gail sees things, he sees the value in something. He sees something that to him is beautiful or perfect or lovely. And his instinct is to hold it so tight that he breaks it, but he doesn't realize that he's breaking it, or that he's going to break it, or that holding it so tight changes that nature of it, which he so treasured. And it makes me think that that's Ayn Rand's view of how others think of selfishness, as opposed to her view. If we are acting in what is our own self-best interest, we're being selfish. You are putting your needs first and then moving forward. And there's no negative connotation there. There's no ugliness. There's no good or bad there. But if you're viewing it as gimme, 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 it's mine. Well, there's all kinds of negative connotation there. And we can clearly use those very limiting us versus them words of good or bad. And that's the view, that's the image that comes to most people's minds when you say the word selfish. So I got this strong feeling that that's the contrast we're being shown. Ayn Rand is showing us how others view selfishness versus her idea of it as reconsidering ethics entirely. So, because, you know, ultimately what she's doing for us when she's considering the virtue of selfishness, she's making it a virtue in her mind because she wants to totally reshape our code of ethics, as it were. And I think that, again, the literature aspect of this, she does a really brilliant job of feeding us the different ways in which this virtue can be viewed. And so I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Maritza, I have a lot of things to say about what you said. Let me start by saying I like the one the part where you dropped, merry band of individuals and then transform that into merry band of mediocrities. I was waiting for you to drop the merry part and move to either sad or anxious band. But so I want to make a couple of points here. First point I want to make, that this is kind of function creates its own form. So this is, and the function is actually this. It is you saying, I will. That is the starting point, creates forms. Whereas here, goods are here, it starts with forms. And those forms, and what you talked about parasites. So this is entirely parasitic. This part is creative. This part is entirely parasitic. And most importantly, even the words that are used. So this is, I'm using bar for those people who are not familiar with mathematics. Bar on the top means the exactly opposite of that. So this is an I bar. Now I wanted to explain why I use C, because when you actually look at what you're building, you're really building a community. You're building world for people. You're building a great society within which you can live. So really, you're building a community. Even when architect is building love, right? Rupali is building her school. She's building a community. Even when Rourke is building the Monadnock Valley, he's building it for those people who are going to flourish, who are going to be able to do things. So that's why I put C, community. And that actually connects to the first-hander and second-hander, because these people are not focused on the physical world. They're taking the community which was there and using it as a fodder, using it and exploiting it. Okay. Now, I want to show exactly how this is inverted. Okay, this whole thing is inverted. So Ayn Rand talks a lot about this part, that the notion of I is all screwed up. Notion of self is screwed up. I want to point out that this notion of community is also screwed up. What Rourke is considered creating is a real community. What Toohey is creating is basically consuming all the things that look like community and using it for the exact opposite purpose of killing the individuals. See, this community supports the individual. This is the idea behind the US Constitution, behind the Declaration of Independence. Individuals have these rights. And in order to protect that, you build a government that will support, that will enable people. So that is the real meaning of community. Community that is used here in Toohey is exactly opposite. It's actually a means that is being used to actually enslave people through use of truth. Again, all the ideas of truth are being used for exactly the opposite purpose of this truth. These are ideas to actually destroy the truth in order to rule people. So it's an inversion at a very deep level. Now we live in a culture where most of our words are like this. Most of the words pertaining to I, most of the words pertaining to community, and most of the words pertaining to truth that are floating around are actually in this red zone. Ayn Rand has brilliantly pointed out this relation, that I is here, not here, in virtue of selfishness. But I think this is absolutely true for these other two as well. So that's what I wanted to say. Next up is going to be Rupali. Give me just a second, stop share. Rupali, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. So in this section, there are two things that come across as a theme for me. One is the collective spirit versus the private selfish motivation. And the second part is this entire part 4 starts with spring, the idea of spring and Howard Roark's flourishing, reaching his potential. But it is also a fading of seasons for someone like Peter Keating. And Katie is pretty much dead, as Maritza pointed out in this, in her talk. So we also see Toohey really coming to his crescendo too in this part, and then his downfall from there. So in all of these characters, just having their either their highest points or their coming down. It all happens in this section. So I'll just start with the contrast of the collective spirit versus the private selfish motivation. And it starts right in chapter 6, where Mitchell Layton talks. He is this man who's inherited wealth from his ancestors without really doing much. And his whole idea is that, if we force people to do good, they will be free and happy. And the whole idea that nobody would have to do anything except work for the common good. And Rob talked about it, that, if they would do it for one person and the other person's doing for another person, and nobody's really happy, but that's the feeling. And Toohey is with all of his puppets, and each of them is talking about how wonderful it is to be unselfish. So Jessica Pratt says, the noblest principle and a sacred duty, and much more important, unselfishness is the noblest principle and sacred duty, and much more important than freedom. Unselfishness is the only way to happiness. I would have everybody who refused to be unselfish shot, to put them out of their misery. They can't be happy anyway. So, and who are these people to make decisions for somebody else? What gives them the right to think that they know more than the individuals, or more than the others, just because of the collective self? And then the best part is where Peter Keating talks about the march of the centuries, and he wonders, why did that fail? Because he was collaborating in the way that the collective sense demands collaboration. He says they had worked hard in harmony through conference after conference, each giving in to others in true collective spirit, none trying to impose his personal prejudices or selfish ideas. They had made the buildings modern, more modern than anything ever seen, more modern than the show windows of the Slaughter's department store. So the fact that, without really having a single thread of integrity, that collaboration does not mean anything. Now, if you look at the contrast, when Howard Roark is talking about what does it mean to have integrity in a building, he talks about how he thinks of work. Howard Roark says on page 578, I'm never concerned with my clients, only with their architectural requirements. I consider these as part of my building's theme and problem, as my building's materials, just as I consider bricks and steel. Both are only the means of my work. Peter, before you can do things for people, you must be the kind of man who can get things done. But to get things done, you must love the doing, not the secondary consequences. The work, not the people. Your own action, not any possible object of your charity. So there's that. He also goes on to say, Peter, I love this work. I want to see it erected. I want to make it real, living, functioning, built. But every living thing is integrated. Do you know what that means? Whole, pure, complete, unbroken. Do you know what constitutes an integrating principle? A thought. The one thought, the single thought that created the thing and every part of it. The thought which no one can change or touch. The only thing that matters, my goal, my reward, my beginning, my end is the work itself, my work done my way. And so he goes on to say, my work done my way, a private, personal, selfish, egotistical motivation. That's the only way I function. That's all I am. And so that's the difference between the collective versus working by himself. But then he goes on to help Peter Keating with the Cortlandt building, and he signs a contract with him. And Howard Roark says to Peter, now we are partners. There is a contract between us. I'm not doing this as a favor to you. You have your share to do. It's a legitimate share. That's my way, my idea of cooperation, by the way. So it's not, that he is working just alone. He works with people, but he recognizes people for who they are. He's also giving Peter a chance. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. The second is the contrast between Keating and Winan in this section, where both of them come to Howard Roark and both of them speak honestly. We see that where Keating comes and talks to Howard Roark and tells him that he is a parasite. He says, I've been a parasite all my life. You designed the first house I ever built. You designed Cosmos Slotnick building. I fed on you and all the men like you who've lived before we were born. The men who designed the Parthenon, the Gothic cathedrals, the first skyscrapers. If they hadn't existed, I wouldn't have known how to put stone on stone. This is not an act, Howard. I'm very conscious of what I'm saying. And I came here to ask you to save me again. And so here he is telling Howard Roark how he feels. And then we have Gail Winan when he's talking to Dominique about, he can see clearly that he's not enjoying his work at the banner, that he can feel the disconnect between who he is and the work that he is doing. And he sees the banner at his house and he says, for once, Dominique, I can say what I believe. And he is beginning to also kind of see that there is a disconnect between himself and the work that he is doing. But both can say what they believe to Roark. They're coming to that point of recognition. And I think that's bringing their personalities kind of to a point in this section where now they can make a decision how they go forward with it. So that was one thing. And then the second part is about Keating himself, that his, where he cannot really, even though he understands where he is, he cannot recreate himself. He's, and the idea of pity that Howard Roark feels for him, where he says, let me just get to that page 582 right here. He shows his paintings to Roark, and Roark says, it's too late, Peter. And the feeling of pity that Howard Roark feels, he says he had never felt this before. Not when Henry Cameron collapsed in his office at his feet, not when he saw Stephen Mallory sobbing on a bed before him. Those moments had been clean, but this was pity. the complete awareness of a man without worth or hope, this sense of finality, of not to be redeemed. There was shame in his feeling, his own shame that he should have known, he should have to pronounce such a judgment on a man, that he should not have known an emotion which contained no shred of respect. This is pity, he thought, and then he lifted his head in wonder. He thought that there must be something terribly wrong with the world in which this monstrous feeling is called a virtue. And to have pity, I think there's a difference between being sympathetic or having empathy and having pity on someone. And that difference, he clearly, Rourke has empathy. You can see when he works with Peter Keating, and Peter Keating thinks that he should really throw him out. But Howard Rourke says, let's not even remember what things happened in the past. Let's just continue to work on what is important now. He understands that, you know, humans can make mistakes and they can be redeemed. But when Peter Keating is at a place where he cannot even redeem himself, then that's when he feels, okay, you know, how, when somebody falls down at that level, what can you do for someone? And to say that the collective spirit has actually done that to him. Everything that Peter was told by his mother or by Tui or by, and his own belief that everybody else's word matters except his own. He comes to a point where he cannot even if he tries, he cannot even pull himself out of that hole. And so to think that having pity on someone could be a virtue is just very shocking for Rourke. So for me this week, I just thought that was something that struck a chord, was the collective versus the private, and to his image of the typewriter and every key and his control. It reminded me of Winans' image of every wire going down to every person, and the idea that both men want this control over each individual and not recognizing. I thought those were two very interesting images that came across in this section. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Sherri. Sherri, sorry I skipped you in the middle.
That's totally fine. I like going right here. It's perfect. Rupali, I love that connection of the two, the typewriter and the buttons on the desk. That's really, really good. I wanted to start here with the March of the Centuries World Exhibition. We had two different, this is their second World Exposition that is mentioned in this book. Of course, way in the beginning, we hear just the snippet of Henry Cameron and the Chicago World's Fair when everything went to the historic styles, and Rob is playing with a bunch of,
Sorry.
he's already playing with
sorry,
sticky notes. Thank you. Shall I take them?
No.
No, okay, he's good. All right, so we have this Chicago World's Fair in the 1890s or 1880s when they go to this burgeoning Chicago School of Architecture that's fresh and unique and really quite modern, and they turn their heads on that completely and they go to historicism. Well, now we are here in chapter 7, 4th section of the book, and we have what's mentioned as the March of the Centuries. There is, of course, a 1933-34 Chicago World's Exhibition again. This one is called the Century of Progress. And of course, it happens right in the grip of the Depression, and we're really focused on the future. Chicago took much of the lakefront because Chicago is essentially boggy soil. And that whole lakefront area had been reclaimed as buildable land. And this is the first thing that they did with it. So I'm going to have some pictures to show, and then I've got a little video. Yes, you share screen. One of the things I want to mention here about this is the older World's Fair in Chicago was known as the White City. You need to go back here. Was the White City. This one was known as the Rainbow City, because it was so full of really bright Technicolor. This is one of the World's Fair posters for it. And you can see some of the modern buildings in the background. You can see there's a Zeppelin up here on our little Lady Chicago's left arm. The Zeppelin actually landed at this exhibition. You can see all the airplanes. There was a house design there was several house designs, and one of them included a house that had brand new thing, a garage. Well, it also had its own mini airplane hangar for, when you landed your private plane. These were what they saw as modern. Here's another one of the posters from it. It's very much, it was modern. But what's interesting is that the group of people that were on the organizers of it was one Raymond Hood, if you remember from the Tribune Tower. So the Tribune Tower architect, Raymond Hood, who did neo-Gothic architecture for a fair bit of his time, had switched, and he was now doing Art Deco. There's still little Gothic touches in there, but it's really taking it to the Art Deco. This one is no, this one's in New York. And the name of the building it's the Radiator Building. You almost knocked it out of my head, Rob. But there's a carbon and carbide building in Chicago, kind of similar in its details, but instead of black and gold, it's green and gold. Yeah. And then, of course, Raymond Hood also did this lovely Art Deco piece. So the other things that were going on at the time is, like I said, they mentioned in the book that Howard Roark was asked to be part of the World's Fair, and he refused unless he could do everything. It is very, very famously known that Frank Lloyd Wright was asked to be part of this Chicago World's Fair, but he couldn't get along with anybody. I think he too wanted to do the whole thing. So he was very inconspicuously missing in that group. This is one of the houses. This is done by George Keck. It's the House of Tomorrow. And this is actually a photograph from the time from the exhibition. So this is, I think it's 10 cents to get in to see the house. This is right up on the lakefront, out on the dunes, the sand dunes. There was also a couple of other weird things because World's Fairs are huge events. There was a whole set of Midway nightclubs. Some of the featured acts were Judy Garland and the Andrews Sisters. So these were really big events. There was also the Polar Exhibition ship from Admiral Byrd was parked there, so people could see that as well. And it was very car heavy. This is a 1933 Packard, but you also saw the Duesenberg and Cadillac limos.
You might have noticed who's in that 33 Packard right there. That's Sherri.
We were babies.
I know, that's me and Sherri at our wedding.
And we got married. Actually, this just occurred to me now in Chicago on the same lakefront section that was the World's Fair. But let's stop share this and share the video. And as you get that ready, a couple of other totally wacky things. They had a vertical parking garage. And as Rob is pulling this up,
Safari here.
this is a little video. It is a little long, and I apologize for it. It's 11 minutes, but it is such a great example of what this was like, to really give you the flavor of it. And the other thing that I loved so much about it is it gives you also a bit of maybe what a wine and newsreel might feel like, including this sort of carnival barker voice. So enjoy this.
Here we are, folks, at Chicago's world-famed Century of Progress, the spectacular fair that was started by a beam of light from the Star Arcturus. People from every corner of the world came to see its magic and its marvels. No less than 22 millions of them came swarming into this colossal show to witness the brilliant handiwork of its modern, unparalleled ingenuity. Here's the famous Avenue of Flags, a beautiful flag-bedecked boulevard, every foot of its magnificent concourse filled with an endless stream of pleasure seekers. In gay attire, full of the holiday mood, keying their spirits to the glitter and sparkle of their surroundings, eager participants in the sweep and glory of a show unmatched in the annals of fair making. Like a sentinel commanding the sun, stands the Hall of Science, saluting the waters of the shimmering lagoon. It is a typical example of the regal architecture that is to be found everywhere on the ground, creating, together with its companions, a skyline of glowing monuments to beauty. Look at this dazzling performance of architectural effort, a symphony in steel and stone and glass, a tribute to structural perfection. With its graceful lines and commanding pylons, it offers a vivid modern contrast to an age-old Maya temple nearby. These majestic records of artistic achievement are to be seen everywhere. Visitors flock by the millions to drink in their glories. Following one upon the other, they create a picture that enthralls the eye with their sweep and majesty, a gorgeous climax to this vista of blue-green lagoon. Seen from the deck of a launch or across the rippling waters, this group makes an unforgettable impression. Visual music with chords of rainbow hues, the dream of the artist come true, the hope of design made real. Mingling with the brisk tone of modern America, we find, too, the spice and flavor of the foreign. From Europe and the Orient come resplendent roofs of gold, exotic reminders of different times and civilizations, adding their individual touches to the scintillant pageant that has made the World's Fair such a unique adventure. Once it was Ferris wheel, but today it's the towering sky ride that offers the major thrill of the fair. These towers rise into the sky to the dizzy altitude of 628 feet. And what a view visitors got from the windows of these rocket riders. Traveling across the lagoon, one saw far below the fairgrounds in a molten glow of brilliance. Blues and reds and greens and yellows, all fused into a blazing kaleidoscope of color. Truly a fairyland of light. And now back to earth. Here we once more are on one of the main avenues of the fair, amid that never-ending tide of humanity pounding along in search of excitement. 44 million feet, dog-tired and aching, but who cares about weary feet with all that whirl and glitter beckoning us on and on? To pause before this map-covered dome, the back view of the exhibit, 1,000,000 years ago. Let's go round front and take a look. Here's King Kong himself and two of his gentle playmates entertaining the Midway crowd. But this is only one of the countless bizarre and fascinating displays that made the Midway a perpetual Mardi Gras of frolic. The Midway, chief artery of thrills, city of million lights and spectacles, a blaze of flaming color, of sights and sounds and hurly-burly, teeming with magicians, sword swallowers, dragon rides, alligator fighters, Egyptian hotcha girls, sideshow wonders, a midget village, and what else do you like? And rivaling this conglomeration of freaks and fakers are the bazaars from Belgium, Germany, France, Holland, and other countries, enticing with great bustle and ballyhoo the curious visitor with their strange and tempting wares. And of course, No midway is complete without a few spine curlers. And here's our old friend and thrill maker, the roller coaster, providing heart throbs and spine chills aplenty. All kinds of visitors came to the fair. Here is Admiral Byrd's flagship, back from its adventures in the lands of snow and ice, to take a dominant position in the aggregation of queer craft and roaring planes that came to roost on the waters of the fair. In panorama, the north end of the fair presents a vista of sheer beauty, a glamorous setting for that galaxy of architectural gems. Seen from above, their commanding grace is clearer than ever, casting over the scene a compelling note of progress, breathing forth the true meaning and spirit of this world's fair. Colors, tones, shapes, all sharply etched in brilliant design, a harmony of effects that captivate the mind. And now we come upon a most unique structure, the Travel and Transport Building, presenting a dominant phase of industry in its most commanding aspect, a triumph of architectural design and balance. Bold and austere in line, it serves as a symbolic landmark of that section of the fair dedicated to travel. And here is transportation in its most modern, thrilling expression. The Temple of Champions, with its clean-cut lines and splashing fountains, mingling beauty with utility. A proud symbol of the world's century of progress, stressing in particular the most universal mode of individual transportation. In the shadow of this modern architecture, crowds come daily to see how cars are subjected to acid tests of endurance. This miniature track, with its 45-degree side banks and its saucer turns, is the proving ground of car performance. The pit in the center, affectionately called Death Valley and Punishment Pit, subjects a car to a grueling examination of fitness. It looks as though something is happening. Let's go down and see. Here is a real surprise. Harry Hart, national racing champion and daredevil of the racetrack. No fashion shows for Harry. He's going to show us the real points of this thoroughbred. All right, Harry, let's go. He's off in a smooth getaway, and now watch him go. 35, 40, 45, 50 miles an hour, zooming madly around the track, having the time of his life. And these mobs watching him are getting one grand thrill. Listen to those tires screech and scream as he takes the curves. Look at that car hug the road like a beetle. Could a racing model do better? Here he comes again on the far side. Watch out! Oh, that was Harry up to his old tricks again. Beautiful balance to that car. Did you see him take that 45-degree incline? Just a little of the old racetrack fever. Here he comes again. And again he takes that thrilling tilt. I'll say that car has balance. I can see now why she was chosen the winner. And now watch Harry come down the ramp at full speed. Here he comes. Dolly! He must be awfully confident of that car he's driving. And now he's away again, burning up the track with smooth, unadulterated power. Here he comes down the ramp. What's up, Harry? Oh, a trick. Stopping in the middle of a hill. He must have perfect brakes to get away with that. Now do it at full speed, Harry. And there he tears. Hell bent for horseplay. Up, down, stop. Nice work, Harry. No swerve, pitch, or brake throw. Those brakes must be good. And now he's speeding into the home stretch and pulls up on a dime. Hands off the wheel, a beautiful ending to a grand performance. And one sweet car, too. Nice driving, Harry. What now? Two more speed boys. Looks as though this is going to be a contest. All right, boys, let's see your stuff. Look at those terrors plow through the sand. See them go down into those shell holes and climb right out without a pause. Without a pause. They take these nerve-shattering bumps in full stride. Without batting an eyelash. Ride 'em, cowboy. They buck and jump and keep right on.
This incredible product cleans
sorry,
any
we're gonna have
toilet
an
in 60
ad.
seconds without any scrubbing and costs
Yeah.
just $40.
Well, this is
I've
appropriate.
seen tough babies before, but never anything like this. What a brutal test for those cars. Motors, gears, and body, every part of them, certainly comes in for a cruel and terrific hammering. Boy, look at those slithering turns, those bone-jarring leaps. No one watching these demons on wheels can count their strength and sturdiness. And they take it. What's more, these cars absorb this fearful punishment not once, but 6 times a day. And judging from the crowd, this show is a great hit with the World's Fair visitors. along. Oh, he's over. Hope nothing's happened. No, here's the driver. Safe and sound. Not only safe, but enjoying himself. Looks as though he did it on purpose. I'll bet he just did it just to prove the safety of those all-steel bodies. Let's see the damage. Put her up on her wheels. Boy, was I fooled. That car is as good as new. Just a little shake-up. But what's that to these all-steel body punishment fiends? Can you beat that? Off on its own power again. I bet all you folks are wondering what kind of a car that is. Why, it's a Plymouth. My hat's off to that bus. Those high-geared performers never falter. They are the actors in a show that must go on, which does go on, not once or twice, but 6 full times a day, every single day, week after week, month after month, and with the tenacity of real champions, they keep right on, unmindful of the exhausting effects of the most thorough test ever devised, thus exemplifying real achievement, real progress in motor car safety and construction. Let's give those drivers and those sturdy cars a great big hand.
All right, Rob, let's stop share that. Okay, so,
Oh, it's still going.
oh, it's still going. Hang on. We gotta
There we go.
stop. Okay, now we go back. So you notice how whenever we hear about Winans newsreels that they always end in, it starts with something tender, but it ends in either sex or some scandal or titillating, or in this case, advertisements for the cars. So that gives you a real flavor of how big of an event these World's Fairs were. By this point in time, they're starting to kind of wane. I think honestly, it might become the Olympics as the new World's Fair, where we gather everybody together in one big thing. But that gives you a real sense of what that was at the time. The other thing I really wanted, was there something on that? Oh, there's one detail that Ayn Rand mentions in here about the World's Fair, is that there was the one thing that saved it. She claims that there was a flop, and the one thing that saved it was this dancer who danced with a live peacock.
And nothing else.
And nothing else. I think dancing with a male bird would be really, I mean, roosters aren't fun to hang on to. I can't imagine what a peacock would be like. But anyway, there was in fact a fan dancer. Her name was Sally Rand, and she danced with ostrich feathers, and only ostrich feathers. So there's a little tie to that perhaps, but I wouldn't dance with a bird. That would be too much.
Yeah.
You might get pecked. Anyway, the other thing that I wanted to talk about was Maritza brought this up a couple of weeks ago about her favorite line in the book. And someone had asked of each of us, what is our favorite line? And I have yet to come up with that, but I have perhaps come up with one of my perhaps favorite scenes. So I'll do it that way. And that takes us all the way back to page 211. And the reason I bring it up now is because I think it ties very much into the things we are talking about this week, the chapters we're reading this week. And the scene is, it's when Howard Rourke is called to Dominique's house to fix the marble. And remember, she goes in there with a chisel and a hammer, and she gives it every single ounce of energy she has. And all she does is succeeds in putting a scratch in the stone. That's all she's got. And so we have Howard Rourke coming up the stairs and feeling very much like we see that he's this incongruous he makes the house seem incongruous around him. And so my favorite scene is this one point. There it is, she said, one finger pointing to the marble slab. He said nothing. He knelt, took a thin metal wedge from his bag, held the point against the scratch on the slab, took a hammer and struck one blow. The marble split in a long, deep cut. He glanced up at her. It was a look she dreaded, a look of laughter that could not be answered because the laughter could not be seen, only felt. And he said, now it's broken and needs to be replaced. Now, what I love about that scene is it's this sense that he fully knows where the situation is going, what's happening, what she's doing, and takes it all with that sense of humor, that sense of pride, and that sense of capability. And we get to the next, in the same scene, we get to this description of marbles. And he says to her, it's important to distinguish between the various kinds of marble. Generally speaking, there are three kinds, and he describes all this. True marble, he says, is a metamorphic form of limestone. And all this is very, very true. All these details about stones and this kind of marble, that kind of marble, all of this is beautifully researched and exactly right. But she says that, or he says this: true marble is a metamorphic form of limestone produced by heat and pressure. Pressure is a powerful factor. It leads to consequences which, once started, cannot be controlled. And so we obviously all have caught that he's not talking about marble right here. But what's interesting to me and why I love this scene so much is it's not just about Howard Roark and Dominique. It's about how Howard Roark provides that pressure to every other character in the book. And in these few chapters that we read this week, we're seeing that outcome. And we're seeing what happens when to each of these characters when they're presented with the pressure, the existence of Howard Roark in the world. And with Peter, we have this sense, we hear this talked about in page 563, where he's closed up the second floor of his office, you know, he's realizing that it's become almost a brand of shame to be, to have that public favor that he's always wanted. But it's this little detail. It was inactivity that he dreaded. It was the question mark looming beyond if the routine of his work were to be taken away from him. And so that so brings me to mind this this scene when he comes to Roark for help on the Cortlandt homes, and there's this description. Let me find it here. When Robin mentioned this, several people have mentioned this about how when they finally make a contract to design that Howard's going to design Cortlandt homes, there's this internal dialogue that we have with Peter. Let's see if I can find it here. His eyes moved heavily over the room, over Roark's body. He thought, it's not intentional, not just to hurt me. He can't help it. He doesn't even know it. He's talking about how Peter has made this realization. He's talked about how he hates Roark so many other times in the book, but this time what he's realizing is that Howard's existence is the thing that is hurting him. It's unintentional on Howard's part. It's just that he exists, and that itself is the thing that hurts Peter. And then we get to, this is a step back here actually to when this is, several people have talked about his painting. It's such a heart-wrenching bit, but I wanted to point out this little detail that what he does, let's see, do I have the right page? I want to get to the right page. Yeah, I'm out of here. So remember, we have this situation where Peter is all glumly silent on everything. He won't tell his mother where he's going. And we find out that he has done this. He went to a shack he had rented in the hills of an obscure village. He kept paints, brushes, and canvases in the shack. He spent his days in the hills painting. He could not tell why he had remembered that unborn ambition of his youth, which his mother had drained and switched into the channel of architecture. He could not tell by what process the impulse had become irresistible, but he had found the shack and he liked going there. And he talks about it's neither a pleasure nor a relief. It was self-torture. But at the same time it's self-torture, we also hear this. He sat alone before the easel, a sense of peace. So at this point in his life, that sense of peace is self-torture because it's the realization of everything. But I love this little line that she said, that she puts in here. He tried not to think of Ellsworth Toohey. A dim instinct told him that he could preserve a precarious security of spirit so long as he did not touch upon that subject. So this is what the existence of Howard Roark has done to Peter. It's made him make these realizations. He's made him at this point able to say the word I. Remember when we hear Dominique asking him when they're married, Dominique asks Peter questions, and instead of giving his own I think, he gives this litany. So-and-so says, this other person says, he's never says I. This is where we see that. So while Peter tells him it's too late, I'm hoping that now that Peter can say I, and now that he has attempted to get some forgiveness from Katie, that he actually goes back to this little wooden shack because it's his only sense of peace. It's his only sense of solace. And I hope he doesn't think of Howard, or not of Howard, of Toohey there, because that's not going to help him in the least. But I'm hoping that that's what happens with him. Now, with Winand, we have another different situation when this pressure, this existence of Howard Roark is in his life. Now, we have a major change that we've been watching too, and several people have mentioned it here as well. But I wanted to bring up this little tiny detail. We hear early on in the book, when Winand is editing, he takes his blue pencil and he scratches across this page in this sharp, angular line. Nobody has to guess who it is, because it's the quality of the line itself tells you who it was written by. Well, we get here, and Howard Roark is now this pressure in Gail Winand's life, this existence that he cannot ignore. And we have Winand at his desk. Elva has just walked out, having delivered an essay that probably, an op-ed that probably would have been happily accepted before, but not now. He won't accept it. And he does this. He drew a line across the editorial, but the blue pencil stroke seemed tired and ended in a blur. So I think that is a really lovely detail from the very beginning to way up here. We're seeing this person's effect on these people's lives has changed the way he draws a line. I mean, that's impressive. And then there's this other detail. Let me get to this next page. His dislike of work. Now, several of you talked about this too, where he has this sudden love, this eagerness. And it says here, he could not rouse himself to full action. He had never felt a greater desire to work. Now, there's a big contradiction that happens in here. And this next description is just oh, it tells you why that blue pencil stroke has become blurred. It says, he entered his office each morning with important eagerness, but within an hour, he found himself studying the joints of the paneling on the wall and reciting nursery rhymes in his mind. It was not boredom, not satisfaction of a yawn, but more like the gnawing pull of wishing to not yawn and not quite making it. He could not say that he disliked his work. It had merely become distasteful, not enough to force a decision, not enough to make him clench his fist, just enough to contract his nostrils. Now, we'll get further on in a bit on he'll get beyond contracting his nostrils. But I love this detail of what kind of an effect Howard Roark's existence, that pressure of that character has on Gail Winan. And then of course, I can't help, because it's just appropriate, starting where I started there, to go back to this scene with Dominique. So he's had this pressure in her life since the moment they first met. And he, fully knowing what he was doing and fully knowing what Winan wanted for this house, for it to be a house for a house built for Dominique. Now, of course, yes, how is he going to say no to that? But I love this description. In her mind, she accepted the house, the touch of the stair railing under her hand, the walls that enclosed the air she breathed. She accepted the light switches she pressed in the evening and the light, firm wires he had laid through the walls, the water that ran when she turned the tap from conduits he had planned, the warmth of an open fire on August evenings before a fireplace built stone by stone from his drawings. She thought, every moment, every need of my existence. She thought, why not? It's the same with my body. Lungs, blood vessels, nerves, brain, under the same control. She felt one with the house. And then Winan watches her as she walked across the room, as she descended the stairs, as she stood at a window. She had heard him saying to her, I didn't know a house could be designed for a woman like a dress. You can't see yourself here as I do. You can't see how completely this house is yours. Every angle, every part of every room is a setting for you. It's scaled to your height, to your body. Even the texture of the walls goes with the texture of your skin in an odd way. And then later, she wanted to cry, Gail, I belong to him here as I have never belonged to him. So she is realizing she is held here. This is no longer, it's just a moment of waiting for and we hear that in the last couple of weeks we've talked, we hear her internal dialogue of she is now just waiting for that one last question in her mind. And this is the pressure that he has put into her life from that laughing moment of breaking the stone way back at the beginning of the book. And I think that is why I have to call that scene of breaking the marble, now it's broken, as perhaps one of my favorite scenes in the book.
Wow. Sherri, that was just brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. I love the concept of pressure, and this Dominique is the most amazing, but you showed the other variations. Beautiful. Thank you. Next up is Joia.
Thank you. I love Sherri's description too, and the way of thinking it about pressure. And it's something that I'm definitely going to want to talk about, but not yet, because I feel like this is the conversation we get to at the end, where we think about who is Howard Roark and what is the function of the ideal man. And I've never thought about it in terms of pressure, but I think that's just going to be a brilliant metaphor. So I hope we get to explore that idea even more. But today I wanted to talk mostly about Peter Keating and a little bit about Wynand. And the other presenters have been describing how in this section, we're really getting sort of the crescendo of these minor negative characters. And maybe a lot of this whole section we've been reading is somewhat negative. But I've really been focused on the more positive aspects of the characters, because what I see here is we do see some of the more positive elements of these characters coming out. And maybe this is the question of what is better or what is worse. Like if we were to look back at Shrikant's beautiful diagram, actually, Shrikant, can you put your diagram back up for a second? Because I want to say something in relation to your diagram. So as he's doing that, but you'll remember from having seen it that, we identified that these characters, Keating and Wynand, ultimately belong on that lower half as part of the negative spiral. But it's a little bit more complicated in that they also have elements of the green as well. And so perhaps this is the question, like, what is it worse to be someone who's totally in the red on the negative spiral, or to be someone who is predominantly in the red, but also has those elements of the green as well? Maybe it even depends on where you end up eventually. And maybe that even is the question here with some of these characters. But definitely what impressed me most in these chapters that we were reading was really seeing how Peter Keating has kind of climbed his way up into the green. And of course, not fully, as even Sherri was just pointing out, we see that Peter still has to and is involved in a lot of evasion there. And some of the other presenters pointed this out as well, that there are aspects about his past and what he's done that he just can't face. That is the introverted eye that has that fear, the evasion, that can't face the truth. But we do see Peter Keating in a real deep sense exploring and understanding and seeking the truth. And in fact, I believe even from the very beginning, we've seen Peter Keating as a conflicted character. He's had both love and hate for Howard Roark. If we remember, even in the very opening scene when we were first introduced to Peter, that when he had that first encounter we saw with Roark, that Peter dropped the mask that he put up when he was encountering other individuals and spoke with transparency and authenticity. And he had that line that he wanted to know Roark's advice. He would probably take other people's advice in the end, and we see that is what he would do. But there was still that love and appreciation for Howard Roark. So there's always been that kernel within Peter Keating of the good. And I think we start to see some of the flowering of it, perhaps. And to me, one of the most impressive scenes was in the moment where he encounters Katie. And Maritza gave such a brilliant description of who Katie has become here. And I loved how Maritza shared her personal story, thinking about hate versus indifference. And to me, I've always read this scene as a kind of a parallel to the scene at the end of the Ellsworth Toohey section, where Howard Roark says to Toohey, "I don't think about you." And there is the positive version of that Howard Roark doesn't have hate for Toohey. What he has is even worse than hate. It's the ultimate indifference. And for Roark, it's the ultimate expression of his own belief in himself, that, he doesn't even have room for hate for Toohey. It's just ultimate indifference. But here, it's the complete inversion of that. We see that with Katie, what she's done is completely betray and lose herself. That what she's become indifferent to is precisely what was her deepest self, her true values, her love for Peter Keating. But Keating, on the other hand, has this great insight into exactly what's going on. And he has this line that makes him sound more like an Ayn Rand hero, and certainly not like a villain, where he says to you, "Katie, I wanted to marry you. It was the only thing I ever really wanted. And that's the sin that can't be forgiven, that I hadn't done what I wanted. It feels so dirty, pointless, and monstrous, as one feels about insanity, because there's no sense to it, no dignity, nothing but pain, and wasted pain. Katie, why do they always teach us that it's easy and evil to do what we want, and that we need discipline to restrain ourselves? It's the hardest thing in the world to do what we want. And it takes the greatest kind of courage. I mean, what we really want, as I wanted to marry you, not as I want to sleep with some woman or get drunk or get my name in the papers. Those things, they're not even desires. They're things people do to escape from desires, because it's such a big responsibility really to want something. But even just that recognition that I see this as Peter discovering, not only discovering his I, but discovering the importance of his I. And it's there in the scene too, where Keating comes to work with work. And again, that honesty of admitting that he had been a parasite all his life. And I think it was Maritza who pointed out that it's somewhat like the first step of Alcoholics Anonymous is admitting the truth about your past. But we see then Keating is on that virtuous spiral of seeking the truth and admitting the truth. And of course, it's a very hard truth to recognize and accept, but he's on that positive spiral. And we see also that he's on that positive spiral of building. Sherri just gave us that beautiful description of what it's like when he finally goes out to do his own paintings. And of course, it is an experience on the one hand of a self-torture, because he's been on the negative spiral in many ways for so long. But there's also the peace within it, because it is him finally on that positive spiral loop and actually building something genuine that comes from his true I. But then we get to a point in the scene that I have to say, this was something that has always bothered me. So Sherri shared with us her favorite scene in the book. And I'm going to tell you, this is my least favorite part of this whole book. This is something that I first read this book at 13. And I had a lot of questions about this, and it bothered me. And now that I'm over 40, I have to say this bothers me even more. And it is the scene where Keating makes that, I believe, brave gesture to show his paintings to Howard Roark. And what Howard Roark's response is to tell him that it's too late. Really? What makes it too late? And even at 13, I can tell you, I was thinking like, Peter Keating is only 39, and it's not like he's gone blind or lost his hands or lost the ability to paint. What makes it too late for Peter Keating? And I can say now over 40, 39 is definitely not too late. And more than that, I think even since this book has come out, we know even more about what it actually takes to let's say switch careers or go out and achieve something in the world. We have now the idea of the 10,000 hours, maybe about 20 years to develop expertise. And Maritza and I can tell you from our discussions of flow that flow can even help you make that go even quicker. But even to think about, why is it maybe that most people at 39 don't switch careers or suddenly become painters? Most people at 39, it's because they're married and they're in the middle of their careers and they're raising children and they have aging parents. And for Peter Keating, I mean, he has, none of these things. We can see his architecture career is coming to an end. He certainly has time. He has resources. There's no, sort of, let's say, material or physical reason that he couldn't become a painter. And admittedly, it's going to be a very difficult thing. It might be the hardest thing in the world, which he has already acknowledged, to do the thing that he really wants. It would clearly take a lot of practice. It would take a lot of work. He would have to go to that shanty more than once a week. I mean, really, he should be doing it every day. He should be, finding and hiring the best kind of mentor to help, teach him, develop his skills. He'd really have to dig in to what are his true values. We saw in the painting that all he had to express, was just maybe that sad sort of appreciation, but he's going to have to do some of that real deep inner soul work to start to really bring out the I. But to me, the most important thing that he needs is the thing that we see he's starting to have, which is that I will. It reminds me of what we learned from Louis Sullivan, who always tells us to remember the seed. What is the seed? In Louis Sullivan, if you remember at the end of the kindergarten chats, the book ends with the triumphant finale of the spring song. The spring song is the time of willing, and the glory of the spring is everything that has been created because of that I will. But that seed is that I will. And we see that that is the seed that Peter Keating in this form already has. So even though admittedly it would be the most difficult thing, he does have that little seed of the I will. And so who is Howard Roark to go and tell him it's too late? And this really, really bothers me, because in my mind, it's like a slap in the face of what the whole book is about. The whole book is the fountainhead. It's supposed to be telling us that when what we see in Howard Roark is that the thing that matters is your I will, which comes from you, and no one else and nothing else can get in the way of that I will. That is the fountainhead. That's the seed, the spring, the start of everything is the I will. So why is it that Howard Roark here is the one who's trying to quash Peter Keating's I will? It just, my least favorite part of this whole book, because I guess you could say I'm definitely, if we're having teams, I am on the team of Peter Keating redemption. Not because I'm not going to recognize that it would be an incredibly hard thing for him to have to do, especially with all of the mistakes. But one, he is only 39, and most importantly, he has the seed of the I will. So that's what I want to say about Peter Keating. And I did just want to say a couple little things about Gail Wynand as well, because we see a little bit of Gail Wynand on the green positive spiral here as well. Rob was pointing out in his presentation how, for the most part, we've seen how Wynand is, really conflicted about the work that he's done on the banner. We know, like, he never wants the banner in his house. He never wants to talk about it. But in this scene, we do get the glimpses of at least what he thinks the banner could be or ought to be. And it starts perhaps to draw out the sense to which Wynand is on the green upward spiral. So first I even, and we had, and Rob already even just talked, I think, just brilliantly and beautifully about that moment where we're talking about the meaning of life, and Rupali had talked about spring. I always thought it was just beautiful how even in that scene, Wynand was reflecting on the fact that it was spring, and how many springs does he have left? And that quote that Rob pointed out, that what has given Wynand his sense of meaning was that he never sought the outside sanction, that he had the I will. And then we're seeing in this section as well, I got to go to the page where I marked this, was where we start to see that he's starting to feel better about the banner, because he starts, as he says here, pushing Howard Roark, but maybe finally starting to try to use the banner to actually promote his values. And I thought it was even just interesting, the description of when Roark decides to promote, when Wynand decides to promote Roark, how that's different from some of the other descriptions of, what we see in the banner, and especially after the video that Sherri shared, the carnival barker way of promotion versus this description of how Wynand is going to promote Roark. The material was startling on the pages of the banner. It was written in good taste. There were no sensational stories, no photographs of Roark at breakfast, no human interest, no attempts to sell a man, only a considered, gracious tribute to the greatness of an artist. So even there, we're starting to see, Winans' spark of, what he's going to try to do to promote his values. And when he's doing this, we hear that that Dominique recognizes to bring the banner into the house and work, comments that she would know the moment when he would want to see the banner in his house. And all of this is going to culminate into the biggest triumph that Winan has here, which we're going to start to see, which is going to be the building of the great Winan building. I think this is really going to be the answer to the question of the meaning of Winan's life, and really maybe the way we're going to see it as the meaning of Winan's potential. But I did just want to end by reading the description of what he sees, his vision of the banner, and what the banner, what the Winan banner, what the Winan building ought to be. So he says when he's there with Howard looking at the site, I knew what I would become. A monument to my life, Howard. What you said when you came to my office for the first time, a statement of my life. There were things in my past which I have not liked, but all the things of which I was proud will remain. After I am gone, that building will be Gail Winant. I knew I'd find the right architect when the time came. I didn't know he would be much more than just an architect I hired. I'm glad it happened this way. It's a kind of reward. It's as if I had been forgiven. My last and greatest achievement will also be your greatest. It will be not only my monument, but the best gift I could offer to the man who means most to me on earth. Don't frown. You know that's what you are to me. Look at that horror across the street. I want to sit here and watch you looking at it. That's what we're going to destroy, you and I. That's what it will rise from. The Winan building by Howard Work. I've waited for it from the day I was born. From the day you were born, you've waited for your one great chance. There it is, Howard, across the street, yours from me. And so there we see Winan on that green spiral, his ability to build. And what is he building? He's building community. Like his achievement is what's going to help further Work's achievement and give Work the opportunity for his great skyscraper achievement. I guess I'm giving away a little bit of what we're going to see happen. And we're going to see that perhaps the triumph is not going to be so complete because of all the ways that Winan is still on the downward negative red spiral. But that is what we have to look forward to coming up. Thank you.
Wow, Joia, that was amazing. And I look forward to discussing the Peter Keating part, as soon as we're done with the presentations. Next up is going to be Iris. Iris, if you could go ahead and unmute.
Okay. I was asked to tell more about how my parents came to their way of thinking and living in child raising, and actually how all of us ended up being objectivists. My parents didn't believe you could know anything unless you could put it into words. They met in their mid-20s. They were engaged for 2 years. During that period, they named what they wanted out of life, why they wanted to marry, why they wanted to have children, how they were going to raise them. An aside, something I didn't find out about till I was an adult. Turns out that when they began this project, my mother told my father that she was so strongly sexually attracted to him that she thought if they touched, certainly if they kissed, she would have no self-control. And so for those 2 years, they never touched each other. So all of the energy that might have gone into that part of their romance instead went into these conversations they had. They played tennis, they hiked, but mainly they talked and tried to name what they were doing with their lives. They were both firstborn children of shopkeepers. They as old as they, as soon as it was possible, they were raising their siblings. And so they spent their whole childhood raising siblings with no idea of what they were doing. I mean, no direction, just, take care of them. For their own children, they wanted to think it through and know what they were doing and why. All of their friends said, you don't have to do that. All parents know how to raise children. I did some research. There seemed to be one book in the 1930s, I don't think it was very popular, on child raising. It wasn't till decades later that it became a thing. On their own, they studied all cultures and peoples to see what other child raising, not so much theories, but just actions had gone on. The first thing that they got into words was that they were having children for their own enjoyment. Watching a child develop their own interest, personality was like watching a flower open in slow motion. We weren't to fulfill their missed dreams or make them proud or anything. We were to grow up to be our own person, to enjoy our life. That was the thing we heard again and again. Also, we were told we didn't owe them anything. At the end of 18 years, we could walk out the door and never be in contact with them again, which, of course, we never would have considered. I mean, we loved them dearly. It was so clear how differently we were being raised than anyone else we saw in fiction and life. It was just incredible. Their friends, one of the reasons that got put into words was that they had friends who had to spend every Friday night with an in-law, to go on vacations with in-laws. I mean, their life wasn't their own. Some things, I know exactly what words my parents had and, how it impacted us. Other things, I can just look at who we became at 4 years old and 5 and 6, and what they did to get us there, I don't know. Okay, the main thing at the very beginning is that raising a child is a process of letting go until they become an adult, and then you've let go completely. A baby can't even roll over, but at the end of 18 years, they're an adult and can make all of their own decisions. My favorite story about my childhood was the first few minutes of my life. They washed me and brought me to my mother, and she counted all my fingers and toes, and she was very pleased. And I had made a fist, and so she spread out my fingers because she liked seeing my fingers spread out on her chest. And I made another fist, and that happened 3 times. And that's when she realized that the letting go was starting that very second, that I was a separate person with a will of my own. So just really spectacular. Letting go is a continual process, hourly, daily, yearly. By the time we were 6, I think, they knew that we could think for ourselves. And if we were going out, they didn't have to tell us, take a scarf or an umbrella or, a winter coat or something. I don't know if they told us they were going to stop doing that kind of thing, or if it just kind of happened naturally. I don't have memory, but I definitely know that kind of thing happened. You see, it was so different than what we saw, again, in fiction, in life, parents just hovering over their kids. And this is, early 1940s, but still, the kids didn't get to make their own choices. I'd mentioned this last week too. We used to joke with my parents that they weren't a mother and a father because, they didn't do millions of things that we saw everyone else doing. My mother, one time, when I was 10, 12 years old, told me to do something. I would take an umbrella or a coat or something. And I turned to her and I said, "You're a mother." And we all thought that was very, very funny. And she said, it's so hard not to do some of these things because they're just all around you all the time. It's the only thing you see. So they had to be very conscious about what they were doing. I was thinking about this when I was about 50. I met a couple about my age. We visited with them for a few hours. Then we walked outdoors, and both the husband and wife wanted me to put my coat on because they were cool. I wasn't. And that's what most children live with their whole life. And I wondered what their kids were like. When this is another thing, I don't know how it came about, but we were so different. My brother was 4 or 5. Most boys that age think girls are icky. They don't think about them. They don't want any part of them. My brother was looking forward to being an adult where he would have a wife, and that meant he would always have someone to go to the movies with him. And I don't know of other boys that age that are thinking of, someday I'll have a wife. There were many conversations about choosing a career by passion rather than for money, but it was all indirect. I don't remember them ever bringing it up as a subject, but we certainly knew that was my parents' position. They hoped it would be ours. And I had no trouble agreeing with my parents on things like that. I mean, I thought they had done great thinking. But my brother at 5 got kind of confused. And he thought, gee, if every time they bring up a subject, he agrees with them, is he really making a choice? And so he began doing the opposite. And it was something he created later, but it just was confusing when he was little. This is a kind of Montessori type thing that they did, but they learned about Montessori later from objectivism, actually. As babies, again, this is before we could talk, we were served food in a little bowl that had 3 sections. And I talked to my father about it at one point, and he was saying, if they didn't put food in all 3 sections, even before I could talk, I would point at it and let them know, they'd done something wrong, put some food in there. And it was wonderful because as we could talk, became verbal, understood things, they explained to us that a meal was made with a starch, a vegetable, and a protein. And we got to know which those things were. And when we were old enough to open the refrigerator, we'd find little bowls and cups and things of food, and we could put together a balanced meal for ourselves. And my brother did the same. And then when we got older, and we're tall enough, we could use the stove and cook our own meals if we wanted. There's one thing that my brother and I both remember as being very important to us. My mother gave the same talk to both of us. He's 5 years younger, so it wasn't done the same year. But we remember her standing in the kitchen holding a cup she had bought. She had bought this beautiful cup. It was a mug, and it was a coffee mug. And she said it was designed by an artiste who thought only about the way it looked, not its function. And there was no way she could drink hot coffee in it because no matter how she held it, because of the way the handle was designed, it was going to be against the heat. And it made a big impression on both of us. And I know that she had talked about those kinds of things. My father had too, both before and after that. There was something about her standing there holding the mug that, really stayed with us. And both graphic designers and unusual in our fields because we were so concerned about things actually working properly, working for the customer. One of the things that was dramatically different in our house than in any I had seen was that our parents loved us and wanted to be with us. And I just felt so sorry for kids that were sent off to camp every summer. It wasn't that their parents wanted them to have wonderful time. It was that their parents talked about, we want to get rid of the kids. It was just so horrible to see. And everyone just accepted that. That was fine. My father took his vacation in the summer so he could spend maximum amount of time with us. He actually wished he had been able to be at home during our first few years and watch us, again, this flower opening, watch us, discover things that were important to us that we enjoyed. He did the best he could. When he came home, he would, even before we could talk, he would spend time talking to us. The baby babbles and the father says, oh, is that what happened? Tell me more. And that's part of how children learn to talk. And that was one of the things he always did. My mother was always doing things with us while he was at work, trips to shops, Christmas windows, parks. And I mentioned before, she would do book reports on books she had read, mainly inventors and creators and original thinkers. We went, particularly in the summers with my father, we went to all the different kinds of museums, the science and industry, the planetarium, art, museums, historical. We also went to railroad fairs. Again, this is Chicago. Go see the new trains that have just been put on the market. We go to the farmers' fairs and see the new gigantic plows and harvesters and see baby chicks being born in the hatcheries. One of the things they did that was really helpful, after visiting a friend or relative, often afterwards on the way home, they would point out the way these people were keeping themselves from enjoying their lives. They were focused on something that bothered them, and that's all they talked about. I mean, if people in your home, you can talk about anything, and they would just have really sad conversations, or how they were damaging their children. I had a cousin, second cousin, and she had two daughters about my age, and they were both lovely little girls. I've looked at the pictures recently, and she called one of them my princess and the other my monkey. There's one was a little prettier than the other, and just a horrible thing to do to your children. Our toys were not sex specific. Again, this is mid 40s, early 40s. I was given blocks. I still can't really believe that girls weren't given blocks, only boys. I had lots of different kinds of blocks to play with. My mother looked for some kind of doll to give to my brother because she could see how much I enjoyed dolls. And the way of researching then is you go to a different neighborhood and you go to the toy store and see what they have. And it took her, I think, almost a year until she found a Superman doll, which my brother loved playing with. This was, again, before G.I. Joe or anything. There was nothing for boys like that. She went to the library, got a book on how to make dolls, and we went shopping for the fabric to make it. And again, this kind of thing, I was 30, 40 years old before I realized, dark brown skin. This was a Negro doll. She couldn't find any. And so, they wanted me to feel at home with everyone in the earth. Let's see what else I've got here. Oh, almost every day, my father would come home with some story about how he was enjoying his work. He was always doing things to make, he was a typesetter at this point, he was doing things to make things more efficient in the whole plant. And then he would tell us times he would get acknowledged for his work. I mean, just work, you know, sounded like a great adventure, and it always was. They would decide together how they would present new ideas to us, which of them would do it, when, or if it was together. And when I was about 10, I had a conversation with my mother, and she was telling me how great the body was, that we didn't even have to think about it. You know, our hearts and lungs and all the different parts worked just perfectly. But there were times there were problems, and my grandfather, this is why we were having the conversation actually, my grandfather had just had colon cancer, and she was telling me that doctors had found a way to put an opening in the front of his stomach so stool could come out into a pouch. And, you know, this was all just part of invention and the body, and wonderful to hear. This is, again, this is 1950. A lot of people wouldn't even say the word cancer. And, you know, even today, most people don't talk about colostomies. When I was about 14, I had dinner, my parents, my brother and I had dinner at my father's family, and his sister didn't like something her 13-year-old son had said, and she slapped his face. I'd never seen anything like that. And we got to home, I told my parents I didn't want to see any of those people again, and I never did. There was no discussion. It just, you know, I said it, fine. A few years ago, a few years after that, I did run into one of my aunts in the subway. We became friends, and she was and visited me in New York. Something that I've written here and somehow skipped over. Okay, it comes up. One of the things my parents knew was that they knew a lot of adults who had trouble making decisions. They had some friends who had lived in an apartment for a few years and didn't own a couch because they couldn't figure out how to decide what couch to buy. Most of my mother's women friends went shopping for clothing with other women because they didn't know how to decide what clothes they wanted to wear. And so my parents tried lots of different, you know, talked to each other, tried out lots of different things, what might help a child grow up so they wouldn't have that problem. And they decided that the best thing to do was to let us make as many decisions as possible, as soon as possible. And so when I could understand, I could walk and understand, I chose all of my own clothes. My mother would take me usually to a dime store and tell me, this is your size, and pick any two dresses because you've just grown out of your clothes. And then I would decide how to dress myself when I went out also. There was no religion, never really came up. This idea of afterwards talking about what you've seen in the family continued on for me. I met my husband's family in the 1960s, and they're just regular American family, lived on Long Island. And it would take me about 2 hours after we left to put into words all of the things I had seen them doing that kept them from being a happy, healthy family. The first visit, we had dinner with them and their 14-year-old son. and nice conversation, okay conversation. Then after dessert, he asked to excuse himself, and they said no. No explanation of why, nothing, just, you know, they got to decide that for him. And for myself, at any age, I would have been able to skip a meal if I wanted to, you know, not eat with relatives or something, or leave anytime during a meal. My life was my own, and that was very important. Now, in fact, I found adult conversations fascinating. I would stay and listen for hours. Mainly, my parents had discussions with people about capitalism versus communism. They were very aware of the issues. They seemed to be the only capitalists. Everyone else was a communist. I knew nothing of Republicans or Democrats. It was always communism. Hungarian Revolution, I think I was 15 then. I followed it much more closely even than my parents, and stayed home the day that the Russian tanks came in. I didn't ask my parents if I could stay home from school. I just did. You know, again, my life was my own. This is the last one. I made all of my decisions in words as much as possible. When I was 15, I was at a boy-girl party. One of the boys said, "Let's play spin the bottle," which I never expected to have to deal with that. I'd seen it in cowboy movies set 100 years before, but I did not know that was going on. And instantly, everyone else got in a circle. I stepped back, like, how do you decide? I just, you know, I kind of blocked, you know, I don't know how you decide that kind of thing. And then I imagined myself at age 30 in love, married, in a full sexual relationship, and then thought of that version of myself and how I would feel about kissing random boys. Did I want that to be in my past? And the answer was no. And so I didn't join in. And that's everything.
Iris, I am so sorry I didn't get to meet your parents. And I am greatly honored that you're talking about it. It's just amazing. They're just amazing people. Thank you so much.
Yep.
So folks, now comments or questions. Panelists, you are welcome to comment on anything that any other panelists have said. If anybody else has questions or comments, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Sherri, we'll start with Sherri, then Joe and Rupali.
First, I have to say thank you, Joia, for pointing out that one line when Howard says, "Nah, it's too late." That is the line that's bothered me so much, and bothers me even more because no, I'm not switching careers, but late 40s, I picked up the cello. I've never played a string instrument. I've played other instruments, but played a string instrument is particularly difficult. It is bloody difficult to learn, but it's not about getting to be a concert cellist or for Peter, it's not about making a career as a painter. It's about doing the work. So I agree with you. So thank you very much for pointing that out.
Oh, wait, can I just jump in and say, I always thought if there were a karma, I think it was karma that it turned out that Ayn Rand's husband, Frank O'Connor, did become a painter later in life. And so it was not too late for him.
Wonderful. Next up is Joe, followed by Rupali. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it was wonderful presentations by everyone again. Something I have to make this comment about the diagram that Yeah, you put up Sherri. It was really interesting to see this works. And if you take a Buckminster Fuller concept of macro comprehensive, micro incisive, that it works both at a macro level and a micro level. And you can use it with actual countries and actually how they innovate and how their financial institutions actually look. It's very interesting because how their institutions, and actually these countries, you know, they make no bones about it. They actually are calling themselves either imitation-based strategies or growth-based strategies, which is actually more of innovation-based. And it's like a first-hand and a second-hand kind of approach. It actually does work. I mean, you know, but a lot of European, especially Latin American countries take this approach. They don't rely, and then their financial institutions actually mimic what that actually looks like. So how private financing is done in the United States in order to take an idea into all the way through the stages to something that is disruptive, and how this technology is disruptive is something that it's some countries embrace it and some don't. So it works both on the individual level. If you talk about seeking, building, and will, all of those same components actually fit in to when you're creating disruptive technologies. And the same things that you're doing is maybe drift works, but essentially definitely exploit and dilute are definitely work when you're talking about companies that are being copied for technology. And that's why a lot of people worry about whether, sometimes if China does become a world leader, who are they going to copy off of? And so that there's a lot of concern about that, but it works as much both at the macro level and the micro level. So I thought that was really fascinating on a how this relates to, and then how this relates to the book overall. There was just a couple of great points that were made throughout the presentations. I thought Maritza made a really great point when she was talking about the compulsion is the law of nature. And actually Ayn Rand's written quite a bit about man's rights. And in that she talks about nature and nature of government per se. And it's really actually the whole basis of it is to protect the rights of the individual, not necessarily to basically limit the individual's freedom. And that's exactly what the book says. It says, no intelligent person believes that freedom nowadays, it's dated, the future belongs to social planning, and it goes against this collectivist culture. Lastly, I just thought I actually remember the pity versus sympathy distinction that Rupali had brought up. And in the book, I believe it says something along the lines of pity, it notes pity as a virtue. And I think that that's actually incorrect. It's not necessarily pity's the virtue, compassion's a virtue. I think that there are or sympathy can be seen as virtuous to a certain degree, but I don't necessarily think that pity is, because I think pity is something where you're almost holding the person responsible. There's some contempt for the individual. You're almost holding the person responsible for them being in the place that they're in. It's a slightly different, it feels a certain amount of disconnection, not connection. You don't feel connected to the person at all. And I think that's a pretty big difference. And I've just thought a lot about that dynamic in the sense of sympathy versus pity, because I find pity to be one of the worst things that you could feel towards another individual. That if you pity them, then there is a level of contempt and disgust. So anyway, those are just some short comments that I thought
wonderful
were making.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Rupali.
Iris, I just want to thank you for sharing your parents' journey in raising children. From your talk, I have a 12-pointer, like a prescription of how to be good parents. So thank you for that. loved the words you said about how to, have children for the sake of watching them unfurl in slow motion. That's just beautiful. I remember when my son was younger, I would just say to myself, there's no rush. I'll just slow down and watch everything from his perspective. And I haven't regretted that. So thank you for sharing that. It was beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Maritza.
I just want to comment on a little bit more on this idea of pity. I didn't get the feeling that, so to me, I thought that what we were being shown was that Howard Rourke was reacting viscerally to the notion that pity could be a virtue. Not that Ayn Rand was telling us she thought pity should be a virtue, but that in a sick society, which she'd been presenting to us with all these second-handers, they tend to uphold the emotion of pity as a virtue. And Howard Rourke, as the ideal presented to us in this fiction, he has never felt pity. He's walked his meaningful path in such a way that it's just an emotion that he had not encountered previously. So when he does encounter it, he recognizes it for what it is, he realizes this is the feeling that all these others in society have been upholding as a virtue. And what a horror that is. At least that's kind of the way I viewed it. Just my 2 cents there. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Joia, the point about Peter Keating and painting was fantastic, fantastic point. The thing is that all of us, I mean, that the red and green, we have the capacity of doing the green and the red all the time. That's what free will is. You have the capacity. And if you actually figure out, like, for example, if he has genuinely figured out, that actually puts you in a very powerful position, because you're not going to fall again for the Elsewhere to his. You're not going to be tempted to copy everything everybody else is doing. You can make a start. It doesn't mean that, it's definitely going to be much harder to build things. But as Ayn Rand put it very beautifully, when you're working towards building a great world, you are living in that. So if you are moving in the right direction, it is up, and that is going to transform you. It is going to let you understand internally. It's going to let you understand what the world is like, understand the truth. You're going to build whatever you can. It's going to actually start spiraling up. So no matter where you are, and that is a very profound point. And even if it doesn't become a career, it would transform him as a person. And that is what really, really matters first. So absolutely great point. Yes, Sherri.
On the same topic, there is, Joia mentioned this 10,000 hours thing. A couple of years ago, I read a book called Peak. It's Anders Ericsson. And I think he's one of the scientists who was behind that 10,000 hours. And of course, these things get put into headlines of reports, and that 10,000 hours gets kind of pulled apart, and everybody thinks you need to do something 10,000 hours and then, or 10,000 tries or something before it sinks in. This book actually gets into the detail of what that really means. And it's not exactly 10,000 hours or 10,000 times that you try something. But what's fascinating in this book is it talks about, it gives exact examples of how people improve, and some improve much faster than others. And some of the fascinating stories are when people will apply that thought process to why am I not making a step forward? And it's a fascinating read. So if anybody is thinking of picking up the cello in midlife or or any other thing like this, it's a fascinating way to understand how your brain is. Back then, we didn't think it was, these are things you thought you could only learn when you were kids. And that's not really the case now. Now, we're not the sponges that we were when we were little kids, but there's other knowledge that's much, much vaster that goes into it. So it helps that process. It's not all doom and gloom.
Tony.
There we go. First of all, I want to apologize for not being here through everything. I had to go for a moment. I especially wanted to hear about Iris's parents. So please repeat everything that you said that I missed. I have like 4 or 5 completely disparate comments that I jotted down in various presentations. And this won't take too long. And I'm taking the risk of somebody's already mentioned this because I wasn't here through the whole thing. On Shrikant's chart and something he commented about, I wanted to mention that 2A builds a community of people that will intentionally undercut their own individuality in order to become this mediocre norm. But it's also in order for him to realize his alleged superiority. That's his unify to rule. Because who's going to rule? Somebody has to be on the top if you rule. And for Tui, it's going to be Tui, right? So he wants everybody else to be mediocre because he feels he's not. Another thing I noticed, and I don't know, you guys probably, Rob probably especially knew this way before I even noticed it, but it occurred to me that James Taggart in Atlas is an extension of Peter Keating. And if you think about it, I mean, James Taggart has Cheryl, Peter Keating has Kate. Now, Kate and Cheryl, different personalities, but it's sort of like failed relationships. And both James Taggart and Peter Keating are successful, using the quotes, the air quotes, not the ear quotes, air quotes. But they're not, because somebody else does their job for him. Obviously, we know who does Peter Keating's, and James Taggart is his sister, right? Another thing I noticed that whenever people write novels, I always look at names. And it's a very interesting thing because in old stories, you know, there are almost archetypical names, you know, John Goodfellow, get it? And I don't think Rand does that. I think it's more modern novelists try to create a name that'll might give you a sense of something, a feel for something without stating it. But it did occur to me that people have made a comment before, not here, but other things I've read, that Tui's name sounds like a spit, right? So if Tui's name sounds like a spit, well, we all think that's perfectly appropriate. Then I said, well, what about Ellsworth? And if you think about it, Ellsworth would literally mean worthy of God or God's worth. And I said, oh, that's interesting, because if you take one L, a God, a plural of L is Els or Elohim, which is a plural word, right? So what basically he is saying, and this is probably coincidental with Rand, because she's obviously not going to make a religious statement, but he's basically saying, worthy of God, Tui. And I thought that's how it got into my body. And I'm, again, totally unintentionally, but that's how I read it unconsciously. And the final point I wanted to make on making a full circle to Rob's presentation was something I had mentioned last week about the arc of character, how Rand is always criticized for doing archetypical or archetypal, whichever you want to say, characters and without an arc of development. It's true and it's not true at the same time. And here's what I mean. Keating has an arc of development. He goes from beginner like Rourke to success, again in air quotes, to self-realization, and then he admits he's a leech, okay? And as Marissa said, maybe there's hope for him still, but you have that arc of character. Winan goes from nothing, again, like the architects, to complete success monetarily, in control of this huge paper. And he then thinks that he sees the light with Howard. Howard wakes him up to what he could have been. Rather than giving the people what he wants, he feels like, oh, I gotta defend Howard, all right? And then he makes the conceited statement that he's going to control the people rather than give the people what he wants. So his arc goes like this, up, and then it crashes. So he has a complete arc. Dominique has a half arc to her credit. She starts with thinking the world's hopeless. There's no place for heroic people. And she meets Rourke and fights the feeling that, yeah, this is where I don't want to be with him because he's just going to get destroyed, but ends up literally at the top of the building, at the top of the peak. So her arc goes like this. Now, the point I want to make is the two people that don't have a character arc are Tui, who's just a rotten son of a gun, and Rourke, who sort of like came out of the thigh of Zeus as being, I'm cool, man. Just do it the way I do it, right? Well, if it wasn't for those two people without the arc, the other people couldn't have had their arcs. So they're the ones that the novel circles around. And I want to say to the critics who are not here, there are character arcs, and they exist because of the two people who don't have the character arcs. And that's it.
Wonderful, Tony. Great points. Great points. Any more comments by anybody? So I love the points about, actually both those people applying pressure in different ways. Howard Rourke from the top and Tui from the bottom, and everybody else moving accordingly to that. Wonderful. All right, folks. Thank you very much. Next time, again, 5 chapters, and really looking forward to it.
Peace and love. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Everybody.
Bye.